Hey YouTube, Joe's Two Car Garage. We're working on the 99 Pontiac Firebird LSX swap. We're looking at the fuel system today. I've made some changes. I've decided to take this in a different direction. I'm building a naturally aspirated car right now, so I've decided that a factory style fuel sender would probably be best at this point. Cost was starting to get to be an issue with the pump system that I have in there currently, and I decided to pull the plug on it before things got any further out of control. I'm going to use the parts later that I've already bought for this system, and so they won't go to waste. But the system that I've already come up with is already cheaper, and it's almost done. It's paid for, but I'm just waiting on a part to get here, so we'll talk about that. What I've done is I've purchased a V8 style fuel sender for this tank. It's the proper year, so the gas gauge will work correctly. Everything else is going to be correct for the V8 configuration. It's going to have the regulator built into it, into the tank. And that simplifies my fuel system quite a bit. So that's the way I've decided to go. That I paid roughly $235 for the new sender. And that's it. It's done. Once I bolt the lines back in and connect everything, it's finished. I don't have to buy anything, source anything, figure anything out. It's finished. And it's all correct. I'll have a complete fuel pail for the pump to sit in, with the secondary pump in place to provide fuel into the pail for the pump to pump out. All the baffling will be working because it's just that pail. There's no baffles in the plastic tank. That's why they use that pail. That's why they have to have that secondary pump in there. The Walboro doesn't have the provision for that secondary pump, so you have to take the secondary pump, and all of the check valves out of the bottom of that pail to allow fuel to come into it, and I just wasn't comfortable with that system. In a low fuel state, in a prolonged turn or a hard braking maneuver, you're going to have a lot of fuel slosh, and that has the potential to empty that pail and run the pump dry, which leans out the motor, and it could be a disaster waiting to happen. So I've elected to get away from that situation completely and just go back to a factory sender. And the only thing I needed to figure out after that was the return line, because this was a V6 car. The V6 car ran the return from the fuel rail all the way back to the tank, because that's where the regulator is on the V6 is on the fuel rail. So what I did is I got these T's and this adapter together, and I cut a small section of fuel line out of here after the filter, so we're returning clean fuel back to the tank, and flared these two sides, put this T in here with this adapter down to this 5/16. This is part of the original fuel return line. It went all the way up to the front of the car. We just cut it off and flared it and installed it. They're just finger tight right now, just for mock-up. And I think I might have to shorten that a little bit. I think it's a touch too long, but we'll see when we get it in the car. And that's it. It's done. No AN fittings like the other system. We can talk about that too. But right now my fuel system is ready to go. All I have to do is bolt it back in the car, and it's ready to run. As soon as the sender gets here, it'll be here in a couple of days, and I'll pop it in the tank, and that'll be the end of that. So let's talk about the Walboro system and where that went askew. Partially in the cost of the system. The Walboro pump is $90, was the cheapest I could find it for. This is the Corvette fuel pressure regulator filter assembly. And they go from anywhere from $60 to $100. It's not what I paid for it, but that's what they go for. So replacement cost is kind of high on that. And in order to use that, you need to run And what I've figured out is that you need a minimum of 5 AN fittings, dash 6, dash 8, whatever. They run approximately $15 a piece is a good average for them. A little higher, a little lower here and there. It depends on where you get them and what size, what configuration you purchase. But they run around $15 to $18 a piece. So at $15, 5 of them, that's $75. We'll say 80 for the regulator as a good medium ballpark figure, and 90 for the fuel pump itself. You're already at $245. I've got $10 into those fittings. I actually had this T, so I had to get this adapter set up to break that down to 5/16 from 3/8. So 235 plus 10s, 245, and a hell of a lot simpler system. I do have another fuel filter for this already from one of the other cars, so I've already got a brand new filter for that, so that doesn't cost me anything, and I don't have to do any of the work under the car like I would have to with this other system. I'd have to go under there and plumb stuff and make connections and lay on my back and fight with it. And the biggest thing that it gets me out of is this incomplete system inside of this tank. Like I said before, the baffling is the bucket that the fuel pump sits in, the pail. There's a secondary pump on the factory system that draws fuel into the pail from inside the tank. And that pail is kept full by a float, and that is to provide cooling and an adequate supply of fuel for the pump to pump up to the engine. With the Walbro, you only have one nipple. So there is no nipple for the secondary pump to pump fuel into the tank, so you have to make it a gravity feed system. And like I said, in a hard turn or a prolonged braking, you're going to get fuel slosh, and in a low fuel state, you could potentially starve the pump, which in turn starves the motor at the worst, and at the best, it damages the fuel pump. It's hard on it when they run dry. So I've elected to do this instead. Now later when I do the turbo build, I have a whole nother system in mind that's going to be based around an old school metal tank for an F-body, and it's going to use the 98 sending unit, and I'll have to deal with the fuel gauge at that time. I believe they're different ohm rating from 99 to 98. 98 is a standalone. They only work with themselves. So we'll work on that later when that day comes. But for right now, I think this is going to be the best system for the money. And it's a way simpler deal all around. So that's what we're doing today, YouTube. We just finished mocking this up. I got a couple other things I'm going to work on, and then it's off to work we go. So there you are, YouTube. That's what the 22nd of April brings. So we'll talk to you later.